There we go.
Perfect. Hi, everyone. My name is Dianna. I'm with the New Jersey Alliance for Immigrant Justice. I'm so sorry for the delay, but technology seems to not like us. It happens every time. This is the Fair and Welcoming Cities and Counties webinar, otherwise known as the Sanctuary Policy webinar. We are a statewide coalition of organizations. As you can see on this page, these are the list of all the grassroots organizations that are part of our alliance. We also work with a broad range of allies across the state. If you guys, just some housekeeping rules, everyone is muted. If you guys have any questions, please type them into the chat box, and Dina and I are going to be looking at them as they come up. We'll be answering them throughout the presentation. We also sent with the link, we send out some materials for you all. So you all will have them. Make sure you receive them, and we will also resend them after the webinar with the recording. For the purposes of today, these are going to be the presenters of today's webinar. If you guys have any questions, again, please type them into the chat box. So again, my name is Joanna Calle. I'm the program coordinator of the New Jersey Alliance for Immigrant Justice. We're going to have Erica Nava. She's a policy analyst with New Jersey Policy Perspective. Dianna Houenou. She is a policy counsel of the American Civil Liberties Union of New Jersey. Lauren Herman. She is an immigrant rights fellow with Make the Road New Jersey. Sarah Cullinan. She's a state director of Make the Road New Jersey. And Dina Mansour, who is our outreach coordinator. So I wanted to just set this up for today, and we're going to throw a lot of information at you because it's a lot going on in terms of the policy. The New Jersey Alliance for Immigrant Justice has a committee comprised of American Friends Service Committee, the ACLU, Make the Road New Jersey, and our friends at 32BJ, all who work together on a model policy of what a good sanctuary policy would look like in the state of New Jersey. We also share these model policies with our national partners at the ACLU of New Jersey and the National Immigration Law Center. All have vetted this policy to make sure that it fits for what it is that we're looking for, and currently, especially with what's going on at the federal level. So we want to make sure you all understand that, so that we're going to go into the weeds of what this looks like, but it's really important for us to keep that in mind as we're thinking about what we're going to do in our own communities. We're going to get into the details of what the state looks like, what the policies look like, what the political strategy would look like, and what the statewide strategy is. A lot of folks have been asking us, shouldn't we be looking for a statewide sanctuary? Shouldn't that be the goal? That is the goal. We've been working on that as a statewide coalition, but we're not going to talk about state legislative options today. We're going to be talking about the local options, and that is state and county. For context, it's important for us to understand in the state of New Jersey, we have 4 counties that currently have 287G contracts, which are contracts where a staff member within the county jail or within the local city police department are trained by the federal government to act on behalf of ICE. We also have 3 counties that have bed contracts, which means that they lend some beds within their jail to the federal government. And also we know that there are a lot of questions in terms of violation of rights of people and what that looks like because of the collaboration between local law enforcement and ICE. But in New Jersey, because of this model policy, we're really looking to rewrite what a sanctuary city or county look like, which is why we're referring to our policies as fair and welcoming. I'm going to turn it over to Erica, who is going to talk a little bit more about just the state of the demographics of the state, so we understand why this is so important. Erica?
Yes, thank you, Joanna. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us this evening. I'm going to discuss the demographic information in a few minutes, so if you have any questions at the end or regarding the demographics, I'll be glad to answer them. And hopefully you will leave with a better understanding of New Jersey's immigrant population, why New Jersey matters in the national immigrant conversation. And you will recognize that immigration is not one-dimensional issue, but a policy issue that covers many disciplines. So let me start by giving you an overall picture of the state's immigrant population. So New Jersey has as much immigrants as New York and California, with 1.9 million immigrants, which makes it the third highest. Makes it the state with the third highest share of immigrants, and it's arguably the most diverse immigrant state in the country. Why? One reason is that New Jersey does not have an immigrant-dominant group. For example, in California, Mexican immigrants are the majority of the immigrant population. Here in New Jersey, Indian immigrants are the largest group, but not by a lot. Immigrants from the Dominican Republic and Mexico are right behind. So where do they live? And this is immigrants in general, not only undocumented. Immigrants in New Jersey live throughout the state, but specifically they're concentrated in 3 counties: Bergen, Hudson, and Middlesex. Now, there are different types of immigrants, many types of immigrants, right? So you have naturalized citizens. Naturalized citizens are immigrants who either pass a test to become a U.S. citizen, or their parents became a U.S. citizen and they were under 18 and they were able to become naturalized. You also have legal permanent residents, and then you have immigrants with other status that includes undocumented immigrants. Now, why do they come here? So there are many reasons why immigrants come to this country. For example, they receive better opportunities here, and some of them flee their country of origin for political reasons. But I think it's important to note that immigrants don't decide to come to a particular state because they have friendly immigrant laws, right? They're like everybody else to a certain extent, where they look for an affordable place to live, a place where there's work, and where there's economic and social opportunities for their families. Now, the undocumented population in New Jersey. So there are about 452,000 to 500,000 undocumented immigrants, depending on the database that you look at. So either New Jersey ranks 5th to 6th highest in the nation with the largest undocumented population. The majority of undocumented immigrants in New Jersey are employed. 62% do not have health insurance, and I believe this number is higher because this is based on survey data. Many people think that charity care is health care, but it's not. And only 34% of the undocumented population has an associate degree or higher. Now, the top countries of origin are Mexico, India, and from the Dominican Republic. Now, where does the undocumented population live? They're also located throughout the whole state, but mostly they're located in the northern part of New Jersey. I listed the counties with more than 20,000 undocumented immigrants. I have specifically the socioeconomic status and data for every county listed. So if you want more information on the socioeconomic status of undocumented immigrants living in these counties, you can reach out to me and I'll be happy to provide you with that information. Now, many of them, I'm sure you heard many myths about undocumented immigrants, that they don't pay taxes, that they're a burden to the economy, but that's false. Data after data and research show that immigrants are a huge asset to the nation and to New Jersey. For example, New Jersey has the third highest share of immigrants who are in the labor force, are business owners, and are also Main Street small business owners, meaning that there are bodega owners, dry cleaners, etc. Undocumented immigrants also contribute to the economy. They're entrepreneurs, homeowners. They pay taxes, and their annual income is around $35,000. So hopefully you get a better picture of the undocumented population and the overall immigrant population in New Jersey. And if you have further questions, I'll be happy to answer them at the end. Thank you.
Thank you, Erica.
Oh, sorry, Joanna.
No, go ahead.
Sherry has asked a question. She wanted to know which counties have 287G status and what are the 3 counties that have the contracts that were mentioned.
So thank you, Sherry, for that question. The counties that have 287G status, and the purpose of this webinar is not to talk about that. We'll have a separate webinar that will get into more of basics of immigration and what these are. But 287G contracts are in Hudson, Monmouth, Salem, and Cape May. The bed contracts are in Hudson, Essex, and Bergen. But we can definitely cover that at a separate webinar. Today is for the purposes of the sanctuary policy, fair and welcoming policies. And if you guys have any more questions about just basic immigration questions, information, background information, we will have a webinar to cover those separately. We're going to go on to talk with Dianna Houenou from the ACLU of New Jersey.
Thanks, Joanna. Hi, everyone. People have been asking whether municipalities and counties are allowed to adopt fair and welcoming policies. It's not just community members who have been asking these questions. Elected officials have been as well. And the answer is yes. Yes, they can. There is no federal law that requires municipalities and counties to dedicate their local resources to help Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE, do their job. There is no state law that requires, local police to comply with detainer requests or anything like that. So municipalities do have broad authority to adopt these policies. I'll talk a little bit about the federal government and what their policy actually is. So President Trump issued an executive order concerning sanctuary cities, and the U.S. Department of Homeland Security has issued its new plans on how they plan to carry out Trump's orders. And these documents really characterize undocumented immigrants as criminals. They threaten to withhold federal funding from places that refuse to help the federal government round up and deport its residents. And the documents also essentially eliminate the prior policy of prioritization of who ICE actually wants to spend its time and energy going after. And so now the federal government is making everyone a target. There is no contrary to what people what the federal government is saying publicly. There is no requirement that someone be convicted for a serious offense. There is no requirement that someone has any criminal conviction, any charge, or any arrest. So literally, people who have been in the United States for decades, who have been, who have been integrated into their communities and who attend our churches, our schools, and our business, support our businesses, are being targeted. The federal government also is ordering the agencies to reach out to local officials to try to get them to enter into contracts, the 287G contracts and the bed contracts, and it's ordering quick deportation of people. So currently there's a huge backlog of immigration cases, and people are waiting years for their hearings, and the presidential administration's plan to deal with that backlog, which will only grow if they deport people the way they want to, is to deport people without a hearing, without even having a chance to state their case and be heard. So what does that kind of federal enforcement look like in reality? So the federal government's plans for mass deportation means that they will be depending heavily on state and local police. Federal government simply doesn't have enough people in the state to do this work on their own. And the approach will invariably lead to racial profiling and the violation of people's constitutional rights. New Jersey has seen some progress over the years in the way that police operate, and we really shouldn't be going backwards by engaging in activities that violate people's rights and really destroy the trust of community members, which makes it harder for police officers to do their jobs. So New Jersey communities really should implement strong written policies that make it very clear that local resources won't be used to help the federal government do its job. And so there are two things that I want to briefly discuss that you may encounter when you are out advocating for fair and welcoming policies, the Attorney General directive and this threat to defund cities. So the state Attorney General issues rules that local police departments have to follow. One of these directives, 2007-3, concerns immigration enforcement. And this directive prohibits officers from asking victims and witnesses of crime about immigration status, which is really a smart practice that helps officers investigate crime. Because victims and witnesses won't have to worry about whether they're going to be targeted and rounded up and deported simply because they interacted with a police officer to help curb, solve, and prevent crime. But the directive 2007-3, it does tell officers to ask about immigration status when people are arrested for certain crimes, for certain offenses. The directive does not tell officers what to do if they arrest someone for a different offense or if they're talking to someone on the street with no arrest. So police departments really have discretion on whether to ask someone about his or her immigration status in these situations. And so, in short, the Attorney General directive is not a substitute for the police department taking the initiative to implement strong protective policies. And so while you as advocates shouldn't ask police departments to ignore the Attorney General directives, you can ask for policies that fill in the gaps and make it very clear that where the police department has the discretion, they won't be inquiring into people's immigration status. But the other flaw behind with the directive is that it only concerns when officers can or cannot ask about immigration status. But cities should have policies that prohibit using any local resources, which includes personnel, funds, facilities, property, or equipment, to facilitate federal immigration enforcement operations. And the use of local resources to help ICE is not covered in the Attorney General directives. So having these policies in place really keeps cities in line with state law and means that where local officers have discretion, they won't be acting in a way that helps the deportation machine. Very quickly, the threat to defunding. President Trump and his cabinet members have threatened repeatedly to withdraw and withhold federal funding from cities that opt not to help the federal government round up its residents. Even today, Attorney General Jeff Sessions made a statement about this very issue. But this threat really raises serious constitutional concerns. The Supreme Court of the United States has ruled that assisting ICE with immigration operations is completely voluntary, and the federal government cannot force states and cities to do what the federal government wants them to do in a way that's coercive. So this talk about withholding all federal funding, well, that's going to be met with some serious and swift challenges because there are limitations to what kind of money, federal funding, the president controls. The Congress controls a lot of federal funding, not the president. So the president can't unilaterally withdraw or withhold much funding that is issued. And also, we have to be looking at whether these kinds of tactics would be coercive. The federal government is trying to really use funding as part of being a bully, and it's important for cities and counties to really stand up and protect their residents. Thanks.
Thanks, Diana. So someone just asked a question about would stopping traffic and directing detours be considered collaborating with ICE? And what about the need to have specific signed or specific warrants and addresses, etc.? So I will say I would probably hold off on the warrants and the specific warrants. I think we're going to cover some of that in a little bit. And then I think on the stopping traffic and directing detours, we are going to get into the details of what we're asking cities to do and not to do when we discuss the policy. So just so you all know, and then if we don't get through your questions, then we can definitely answer them. So now we're going to hear from Lauren Herman from Make the Road, New Jersey on the municipal strategy.
Great, thank you so much. So on the municipal strategy, I just wanted to echo and highlight something that Dianna just said, which is how important having these municipal policies is. And so one thing that really struck me when the president put out the initial executive orders was that in several of them he mentioned sanctuary policies. And to me, that really signified how concerned he was that local municipalities were not going to cooperate, and how important it is for him to carry out his deportation plans to have the cooperation of local municipalities. So, it gives us a lot of power on the local level, because the Trump administration can't do what they want to do without local cooperation. They simply don't have the resources. And so from our perspective, it puts us in a really powerful position that if we can put these policies in place, there's a lot that we can do. And here in New Jersey, local municipalities actually are granted by the state a lot of power to establish local policies, to establish local priorities that meet the needs of the local residents. So that's really great. The one thing that is challenging, and also for those of us who are policy wonks, sort of exciting, is that municipal law in New Jersey is also very complicated. And it means that when we're figuring out the best way to approach these policies, we have to figure out who in each jurisdiction has the power and what power they each have. So in New Jersey, there's a variety of different forms that municipalities can take. So there are some municipalities that are cities or boroughs or townships and villages, and the list goes on. There are some municipalities that are governed under the Faulkner Act, some people may have heard of, or the Walsh Act. And so basically there are different governing structures in each of the municipalities, and how we decide to go about putting fair and welcoming policies in place in each of these jurisdictions is going to depend on who's in charge and who has authority over which departments, and in particular, who has authority over the police department, because a lot of this is going to come down to who's directing the police department in their actions. So again, it creates a challenge and sort of an exciting puzzle for the folks who are doing the advocacy on the ground to figure out what the best way is to go forward. One thing that we've been recommending is that we want to put in place a multi-pronged approach so that all of the various parts of a municipality are on board. So many municipalities, for example, would have a mayor, a town council, and a police chief. And so we're advising that you would get all of those different actors to put in place policies that suggest that they're all in support of creating a fair and welcoming municipality. And again, this could be an executive order from the mayor, if the mayor has that sort of authority. It could be a resolution or an ordinance from the council, and then a directive from whoever is in charge of the police department that is a little bit more specific and puts in place the policies that the police department is going to follow. The last piece that we're recommending, and again, Sarah's going to speak in a little bit and go into what exactly each of these policies says, but the last piece that we're recommending is a county resolution, and this part is really important because most of the transfers that happen between local detention and immigration detention happen on the county level. So when most folks are arrested, let's say they get pulled over for speeding or, whatever it might be, a little offense, they might spend a couple hours in the local jail. So we're here in Elizabeth. They might be in the Elizabeth jail for a few hours, but they're almost immediately transferred to the Union County jail, which is where they have much more space to hold folks, right? So the local jails are really just holding cells while they're being processed. And so if we want to stop folks before they get into the hands of ICE, we really need to be thinking and working at the county level. So working with counties, again, poses interesting political challenges, and we're going to talk in a little bit about some of the organizing that has to happen because the counties are diverse and it requires more coalition building to put county policies in place, but also has a lot of promise for creating bigger impact if we can get strong policies in place. And I think that's all I have for now, but I'm happy to answer questions both now and in the future if folks have them, because I know that the municipal law can be complicated.
Lauren, just to quickly clarify, I think we have a county ordinance, right? It's an ordinance, not a resolution, I believe. I just want to make sure we clarify that, because the county does have the power of putting on an ordinance at the county level.
That's
correct? Right. Okay.
Yep.
Cool. Thank you. And now we're going to get into the weeds of what this looks like in New Jersey, and we're going to turn it over to Sarah.
Hey, everyone. Thank you all so much for joining the call and for your interest and for helping to stand up to protect immigrant communities. So I wanted to start this part with a little story. Not a little story, a sort of horrible story. So, we recently found out that a community member, we're here in Union County, a man who's lived here for decades, is undocumented, was driving to work, driving from Union County to Monmouth County, and Monmouth County is a county where they have a 287G program. And, he was stopped, I think for speeding or for, having a taillight out or not signaling. And when the police ran his license, they saw that, or they realized he had an out-of-date license, out-of-date registration, and found a warrant under his name for a non-criminal matter, and took him into custody in the Monmouth County Jail. And because there's a 287G agreement, in Monmouth County, it means that ICE immigration officers are actually inside the jail. So this man, his name's Humberto, he's a father of several daughters here in Roselle. He was transferred into ICE custody for, the simple act of trying to drive to work to provide for his family. So, I tell that story because I think it's really important to understand that, these, as Lauren was just saying, these county policies, counties inviting immigration into their jails, or local police officers. In Elizabeth, we had a situation where a local police officer actually helped ICE attempt to carry out a raid, which caused panic and, sort of terror in the community for weeks afterwards. They have a serious impact on the safety and the well-being of immigrant families across New Jersey. So, my job now is to sort of walk us through what is this, sanctuary or fair and welcoming policy that we've been talking about. What are the steps that it actually takes? And, we worked hard on this policy, sort of looking at different models out there, thinking about what are the actual powers and where is it that cities and counties have, and then where is it that ICE really tries to partner with cities and partner with counties and use, city resources or county resources to facilitate deportation. And we came up with a few ways that we think that, cities and counties, a few steps that cities and counties can take to really use the power that they have to really push back against ICE and push back against Trump's enforcement regime. Instead of just saying, a statement of, yes, we're a welcoming sanctuary city, we welcome all immigrants, like let's pass a fluffy resolution. These are actually concrete steps that municipalities and counties can take. So the first is sort of like a assertion of what the county won't do. So the first part of the sanctuary policy or the fair and welcoming policy really just outlines all the different ways that the municipality or county will not enter, will not support ICE and any sort of federal immigration. So it goes through how the local government will not help to enforce immigration law. The immigration law is the work of the federal government. It commits to not entering into any 287G agreements, which would deputize local police officers as ICE agents or allow ICE into the jail. It commits to not having ICE in contracts with ICE to house immigrant detainees who are awaiting immigration proceedings in a county criminal jail or a local criminal jail. Those contracts can be very lucrative. Several counties in New Jersey, including counties with significant immigrant populations, have these contracts. And so these are really sort of steps. This is sort of pushing back against all of that, pre-committing to saying, we're not going to enter into these agreements. We're not going to let our local police work on joint ICE operations. We're not going to set up traffic stops that would enable ICE to stop people. So, when ICE comes into a city, a lot of times they need help from local police officers. They don't know the area. They may not be able, they don't have enough officers to sort of secure an entire street or, to do a significant raid on a business. Imagine trying to shut down an entire factory. That could take 100 officers to do that. So, oftentimes they call in the local police, and this is sort of saying, this policy would, not allow a city or a county to use their local police or to use any, in fact, resource to facilitate that, enforcement action. It also commits cities and, more importantly, counties to not honoring immigration detainers. So one way that many, many, many people are transferred into ICE custody is through the criminal justice system. So people are stopped, arrested, much like Humberto was, and immigration puts a detainer. Often, if ICE isn't in the jail already, immigration will run, or the county will run their fingerprints. It might come up that they're a non-citizen, and immigration will then come in and put a detainer, which is a sort of request that the jail hold the person until immigration comes. So you might be in a position where you can pay bail, but because there's a detainer request or hold on your file, the jail might not actually let you out when you pay bail. They might hold you for immigration to come pick you up and take you into immigration custody. And, these detainers have been considered, held unconstitutional by the Third Circuit, which governs New Jersey. They've been held unconstitutional by several courts across the country. But, still a day or two ago, the Trump administration issued a new detainer form and is really encouraging cities and counties to honor these detainer requests. So our policy would say no, like we're not, our city, our county is not going to honor them. It would also not let ICE into city facilities without a warrant. And that's important because ICE often tries to make relationships with local agencies to get information or to get access to people, picking up people at schools, picking up people at, county health clinics. And so, really prohibiting ICE from entering into any of these facilities would make people feel much more comfortable, immigrant families much more comfortable using local services. So that's the first part, the sort of we're not going to let any of our precious resources, and one way to frame it is to say, like cities and counties in New Jersey don't have endless resources. Why would we spend them to help this big federal agency deport people? We're just not going to. We're going to choose to spend our resources elsewhere. And so that's sort of the first step. The second piece that we have put into the policy is about non-discrimination and about privacy. So we thought it was really important when we thought about sanctuary to think about not only immigration coming into a community, but also, how that very community treats immigrant populations. And not only immigrant populations, other populations that have been subject to racial profiling, to profiling based on gender identity, on homelessness status. So we created this very broad anti-discrimination language that said that the city, municipality, county will not discriminate against any individual using city services based on this, race, gender identity, immigration status, housing status. Sort of a blanket anti-non-discrimination policy that's broad and also would, make sure that the city was sort of equally offering services. Second, city services wouldn't be conditioned on immigration status. So, unlike state services and federal services like Medicaid and, food stamps, which really condition eligibility on immigration status, the idea here is that, cities wouldn't condition their services, whether it's a bus pass or, a voucher for housing, if there's a city housing voucher program or a municipal ID program, that they wouldn't ask your immigration status. And on the privacy element, we thought this was really important. So there's a constant fear, and I think probably a founded fear, that the federal, administration, that the Trump administration will come after people, come after local databases, that there's, could be hacking, or there could be, some type of federal incursion into a local database of, municipal IDs, or a database that tracks students in schools. There's, a lot of fear about that now in the community, and so, this policy would make the city or the county that adopts the sanctuary policy look back over all of its questionnaires, all of its applications, all of the data that it tracks, and take out certain types of information, like asking immigration status, or asking country of origin, and really remove the type of those types of questions if they're not absolutely necessary. And then second, it would also prohibit cities and counties from sharing certain information with the federal government. Now, if you've read the policy, you'll notice that we haven't prohibited cities and counties from sharing immigration status with the federal government. And the reason we did that is that there's actually an explicit prohibition in federal law that doesn't allow cities or counties to refuse to share immigration status information or immigration information with the federal government. It's a really bad federal law, and the way we got around it was by saying, and sorry if this is really in the weeds, but the way we got around it was by, not letting cities and counties share other types of information with the federal government, like release date from jail, like country of origin, like birth date. And so we thought, okay, if you don't share any of those pieces of information, at least it'll be harder for immigration to find people, ICE to find people. And again, that's sort of really, really in the weeds, but I think the main takeaways that you want to have from this is that as a sanctuary policy, we wanted it to be a sort of broad anti-discrimination, non-discrimination policy that would help people with interactions with the police, whether an immigrant or not, whether, with interactions in schools and in other city agencies, for a whole host of groups that, have been suffering discrimination and potentially will, be in a worse position under the Trump administration. And then we also wanted to protect people's privacies. The next piece is a sort of, proactive, what can our city or county do to support immigrant communities? And one of the pieces is sort of continuing and committing to continue to enforce local workers' rights laws like earned sick days or anti-wage theft statutes, living wage statutes. The city could commit to enforce these laws for everybody, regardless of immigration status. Municipal ID programs, these are sort of a menu of options that cities could use, additional funding for legal representation in deportation defense, funding for English classes, ways that cities can become more pro-immigrant and invest their dollars and support immigrant communities. So we saw this as sort of the proactive piece. We didn't want it to just be sort of reactive against the Trump administration. We thought if a city is really going to be a sanctuary, if it's really going to be fair and welcoming, there should be, additional programming, additional services. And finally, U-visa procedure. So not sure how many folks are familiar with the U-visa, but it's a visa that allows immigrant victims of crime who have helped the police or other type of law enforcement in investigating that crime, maybe as a witness or providing testimony, to then apply for a special visa that allows them to adjust their status and one day get a green card. And so a lot of city, this exists, but a lot of city police officers don't know about it. Police departments, county prosecutors may not have a procedure where if you're a victim of a crime, you can go ask, your city, your local law enforcement to certify the crime, certify that you were a victim of the crime and that you were helpful. And that's sort of the first step in getting the visa. And so we added that piece in because we thought it was important that cities start to create a sort of process for people to actually get the U visa. So that's that part. I don't know if there's questions coming up, and we could pause here. There's sort of a last piece to go over, but I don't. That was sort of a lot. I don't know if there's any questions that we want to take now, or I can keep going.
So I guess one sort of, I guess it's a collective question. There's like three similar questions. Is would stopping traffic or directing detours be considered collaborating with ICE? And
I think under this policy it would be. So I think this policy actually has a blanket sort of it would require, it wouldn't allow any cities or counties to spend any city resources in facilitating deportation. So I think we would argue that includes using your stopping traffic. If you're setting up a traffic block to let ICE check people's papers, that would be a type of collaboration that would be prohibited under this policy.
And I guess the other question that was connected to this is, what about our streets, municipal property? Not collaboration with ICE means only with inside a school, or would it be no collaboration with parents dropping off or picking up from school? Like, how does that work in terms of the non-collaboration piece?
I think that's a great question. I mean, I think the way we've written this, ICE couldn't enter onto any school property or any city property. So, if the sidewalk is part of the school property, then they, wouldn't be able to enter into that sidewalk and block people from entering schools. I think you could make that argument. I think, again, like none of these policies will completely prevent ICE from entering into a community, but at least they'll make it harder for ICE to get its job done to try to deport people because, they won't be able to have local police help them, set up a raid or set up a traffic stop.
And then the other is, what about the need for signed or specific warrants? And I know you talked about the detainers. So how does that, in terms of the policy, is there anything on there about warrants versus detainers, et cetera?
Yeah, so that's a really important point. So, a lot of times ICE has these very flimsy administrative warrants, which are basically documents that ICE writes themselves and signs themselves that say, ICE wants to arrest this person because they don't have lawful status. And that's not supported by probable cause. It's not a judicial warrant. And so, our policy says that if ICE actually has a judicial warrant, then a county could, or, county jail or city jail could honor a detainer request, because that judicial warrant is supported by probable cause, signed by a judge, ordered by a judge. So I think, that's a different situation. Most of the time, and in most of our experience, ICE comes in with these administrative warrants because they don't have enough probable cause to arrest somebody, and they haven't taken the time to go before a judge. So if it's just an administrative warrant, then the cities would have no obligation to honor the detainer request or to let ICE into their facilities.
Right. So I want to make two quick comments for you all. We're going to send the recording of the webinar and the PowerPoint. And also, I think I said at the beginning, we sent the model policy and all the materials you need to approach your cities and counties on this when we sent the link, the confirmation link, but we're also going to resend it after this webinar with the recording. So you will have the materials in front of you in terms of the model policy that's been drafted for the county, the resolution, the police directive, and the executive order on the municipal level. It also includes a legal memo written that lays out the legal reasons why cities and counties have the legal right to do this, as well as frequently asked questions. And also there is a link there from NILC. The National Immigration Law Center has laid out a lot of the information on the defunding and what do you say to cities that are concerned about their money being held from the federal government. And we can talk a little bit more about that when we talk about strategy, but I just wanted to, I know some folks have been asking if they're going to have this, and I know questions about whether, specific questions about counties that are coming up, I will address them when we get to the strategy. Let me see through the questions just to make sure there's nothing else on the policy itself. Let's see. How does detention work with regarding to the New Jersey bail reform and with the bail policy, the new bail policy?
Hi, so this is Lauren. So with the bail reform, it's a little bit complicated because the bail reform just went into effect in January, and I think folks, including the public defenders and a lot of other criminal defense attorneys, are still figuring it out. So when someone, and I actually should say, I am not an expert on this, and I know there are a lot of criminal defense attorneys who probably know this better than I do. But when someone is arrested under the new system, whether or not they are held is going to depend on whether there is, let's see if I remember, there's like two types of, it's either like a complaint or, that's not the right word. I have to check my notes. But basically there's like two ways that someone, it's a summons or a warrant. And if somebody has a warrant, then they could be held in jail for up to 48 hours, and during that time, there's a process, and they get like a pre-services, a pretrial evaluation, and the prosecutor would make a recommendation about whether or not they would be detained, and as a part of that process, there's an evaluation about what the risk would be and what other conditions they could put to ensure that this person would show up to trial. And if someone is arrested on the summons, basically they're going to be booked and go home that day. And that's just the process regardless of immigration status. So if there were a detainer in place, it could potentially like gum up the process, right? So if someone was arrested on a summons, so, we were talking before about very minor offenses that someone might get arrested for. If they were arrested on one of these summons, normally they would just go home that day. If there was a detainer, if the municipality decided not to honor the detainer, which they would be legally allowed to do because it is just a request, they could leave and they did not have to hold them for ICE under that detainer. If the municipality decided to hold them after the point that they would be allowed to leave, they could potentially be liable for suit if they were holding them without probable cause to do so. Now, if someone was arrested on a warrant, it's possible, and I would say actually probable, that when the prosecutor and when the judge is making the determination about what factors are going to weigh into, what conditions they should put on that person, and what conditions they need to put in place to make sure that that person is going to show up to trial, they're going to consider the fact that there is this detainer. They're going to consider the fact that ICE may come and pick this person up and sweep them away and bring them to detention, which would make it less likely that the person would be able to show up for their criminal trial. So I think in that regard, it's possible that their immigration status could be held against them, sort of through no fault of their own, because ICE could prevent them from showing up for their trial. So, I think it's something that folks are going to see play out, and we're going to have to continue to negotiate the defense attorneys, the prosecutor, and the judges as they see what happens in play.
And Sarah, to get back to sort of the actual policy, there were two questions about one, what about including health and safety and protection of workers in the policy? So I'm going to give you that one, and then I have another one.
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Yeah, it's what about including health and safety for workers in the policy?
I'm not sure that I totally understand the question. I mean, I guess if it's a question of having local health and safety policies to protect workers, I think that's a great idea. This policy doesn't touch on that, I mean, mainly because we needed to limit it at some point, but the part about workers is really about, a lot of cities there was a big push for cities to have local pro-worker policies when we weren't able to pass anything on the state level. So local paid sick leave policies, local minimum wage and anti-wage theft statutes, ordinances. And so we were worried that under the Trump administration, some cities might not enforce the law equally, might not take complaints from undocumented people and help undocumented people seek relief. So we wanted to just make sure that a city would reaffirm that it's going to continue enforcing the law equally no matter the immigration status when it comes to protecting workplace rights. So there aren't actually that many cities in New Jersey that have worker safety like sort of ordinances or whatever.
Great. Thanks, Joanna. I'll try to go through this quickly so I don't keep folks too long. But yeah, I'm just going to discuss base building and strategic planning, those two buckets. So in terms of base building, it kind of goes hand in hand with organizing. Actually, does go hand in hand with organizing. As Lauren said before, it's important to the coalition that none of our efforts are done in isolation. So what this means is that we're meant to connect our movement to the community. This might be by way of getting in touch with grassroots leaders, organizers, especially impacted community members. This is something that I stress very often, but folks will be doing a disservice by not including those who are impacted by adverse policies. So make sure that you keep them central to your efforts, or at least loop them into what you're doing. Another thing is to keep partnerships with locals. As I mentioned earlier, a local organization where there are no local organizations currently working on this, maybe a regional organization. An effort to push these policies should not be done in isolation, right? So they should be done with other efforts such as Know Your Rights workshops, community support, any sort of events, organizing, trainings, emergency response, which is something that's coming out now. So just keep in mind that it's just not going to your local officials and pushing policy, right? Everything should be done in tandem. Another thing is strategic planning. So as Lauren mentioned also, every municipality is different. This is also the case of counties. Counties are also different. So when you meet up with your locals and stakeholders, make sure you have context-specific discussions. So a policy that might work for Hudson might not work for Essex, for example. I mean, that might not be the case, but just make sure you have context-specific discussions about what different needs that your community might have or your municipality might have. And you should have these conversations with advocates in your community. And as I said, and I can never stress enough, community members who are impacted. Let's not forget about them, right? That's very important. So timing, in terms of timing, looking at what other cities are doing at the time that you'd like to pass policies. Our greatest example is Jersey City, right? They took the lead as they're not finished yet completely. Just them taking the lead could encourage other municipalities, counties, cities, what have you, to follow. In terms of setting a trend, make sure you get a good policy passed, right? Because there might be, as all speakers have mentioned, officials might pass policies that are very watered down. So just make sure you're very aware of what policies are being passed. Make sure it has teeth, because as I said, with the whole model policy and setting a trend, setting an example, other cities will follow. So if there's a good policy there with teeth, other cities and municipalities, what have you, will be more inclined to adopt a similar policy. So I kind of went through that quickly, but if folks have questions, please feel free to ask, but I think that's it on my end as well.
Thank you, Dina. And one thing that I saw a question come up, which is how could you find a breakdown of the policies by city and county, what's left, what's needed, et cetera. We are actually compiling that. We have that. So if you guys want to know if your city already has something in place or your county has something in place, shoot us an email and we can quickly give you that information. The other is, how can you identify who's already doing the work, what organizations are best informed to take the lead in each county and city. Again, reach out to us. We have folks that are already working in major cities and counties. I can probably run through them on the phone now in terms of where we're actively working on this. Hudson County, already there are a bunch of teams working there. Essex County is already moving. Union County has a strong team working there. There are folks working out of Monmouth County. There are folks working in Camden County, Morris County, Mercer County, Middlesex County. I think those are the big counties that we have the biggest presence in. So if you're in any of those counties, it's probably good for you to reach out to us and we can let you know what is going on. We have been trying to coordinate county meetings with the leaders of different groups to just strategize together first and figure out what we can do. It's good to divide and conquer. Maybe some of you know some freeholders and the others know a few other freeholders, and someone happens to be friends with the mayor. It's good for you to strategize together as you're talking about this, while also mobilizing folks around you, because it makes sense when affected community members show up to a council meeting and organize and prepare and understand they have a network around them. As Dina said, the policy piece is only one part of the work. We have to organize and we have to prepare our communities, because all these policies are not going to keep ICE out of our communities. We have to be very clear about that. And so you don't want to be put in a position where folks feel like they think that this policy does something it does not. They still have to prepare in case they do have some sort of interaction with ICE. Someone asked about Somerset. I've had a couple questions about people in Somerset, but no one has really been leading the way. But if there's a group of folks in Somerset that want to get going, we wanted to do this training to get folks started so that you all know how this works, what you need, what you don't need, and so that you guys know sort of what details you might need for you to go ahead and start having conversations. Regarding the defunding threat, I don't have any answer as to how quickly we're going to see it happen or not. Again, I think at this point you're going to see a lot of litigation like you did on the travel ban. I would really be mindful of that. And then the other is, can we send the link to the 9 points in the people power that we mentioned? We can include it if you want. The ACLU actually has them. If I'm not mistaken, you might be able to find it online in terms of the 9 points. But our model policy is New Jersey specific. The 9 points are, I think, national or in general for all So I don't see any more questions. Do any of the presenters have anything else to add? Wonderful. So thank you all so much for being with us today. We try to cram a lot of information in a short period of time. But if you guys have any other questions, our contact information is here. And as we said, we sent you the model policy, so you guys should have everything you need. If you have any other questions on the policies or next steps, please feel free to contact us. Thank you all so much for joining us tonight. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.